Now, I would be remiss if I didn't point out what the hell happened. And the real reason that I was so excited to watch the first round of the NFL draft, it had nothing to do with the Eagles got to move up. Hold on, let's go Merrill Reese. Let me take a sip of coffee before I go into Merrill Reese voice. It was not about whether I thought the Philadelphia Eagles were going to make a move from number 32 in the first round of the NFL draft. I was more concerned to see what would happen to Shedeur Sanders, a player who many believe could have been one of the top quarterbacks taken in this draft. And Shedeur Sanders fell. And he fell, and he fell, and he fell, and he fell, and he fell. And I was not celebrating the fall of Shedeur Sanders, but I did say on Wednesday's show, I had to imagine that we were going to see a fall that was going to almost look like what happened with Aaron Rodgers. And I saw people last night going, no, you can't compare Shedeur Sanders and Aaron Rodgers. How dare you? How dare you compare the two falling? I mean, listen, the Shedeur Sanders thing is wild because if you go, and we have to be fair here, okay? And I like to try to be fair. Before the draft, there were some executives, some unnamed executives, and I think there was an unnamed coach or two, who had said to a few of the national media pundits, we had a meeting with Shedeur Sanders, and it was not what we expected. He didn't seem to take it seriously. There were some that said maybe there was a feeling of entitlement, that there was a feeling of not taking the process seriously, that maybe he thought he was a shoo-in to be a top 5 pick. And so then you had those things got put out. And then you had some people who said, well, that's very just clearly racism, which I'm always kind of interested in the thought process. But all right, so that's the people who thought that he was being disrespectful or not taking it seriously or racist. Okay. And so then it was Sanders might fall. He might not be the first quarterback taken, but he'll definitely be taken in the top 10. There are teams that need quarterback help. And then as you're watching the first round of the draft, you start looking at a nice section of teams where you go, these teams don't need quarterbacks. Are we going to see somebody trade back from the middle of the first round to later so somebody else can move up? And then as he keeps falling, you see Pittsburgh there at 21. You go, all right, let's lay out everything that's happened. Pittsburgh does not have Justin Fields anymore. They don't have Russell Wilson anymore. They really don't have a quarterback of value on their roster right now. They could use a quarterback. The only name that has really been brought up, especially of late with Pittsburgh, is Aaron Rodgers. But Aaron Rodgers went on to Pat McAfee's show a week ago and said that yeah, he talked to the Steelers and he talked to Mike Tomlin, had a lot of respect for them, a lot of respect for the process, a lot of respect for all these things, right? And unfortunately, I'm at a spot where I actually did talk to a Pittsburgh fan today. It was just a Pittsburgh fan. It was a Steelers fan. And I said, hey, were you surprised that listen, your team unfortunately does not have a quarterback. What do you think? Did you think that your team was going to take Shedeur Sanders at 21? And he said, what the hell was his word? He was lamenting it, I think he said. He didn't want to see the Steelers take Shedeur Sanders. Now, why? I don't know. I saw people comparing, and NFL Network was interesting, the dichotomy between, or the juxtaposition, if you will, of ESPN talking about Shedeur Sanders as if he was a surefire top 5 pick, and the NFL Network that really kind of seemed to approach it from the standpoint of he's a guy, he might be a first-round pick. They didn't seem to be losing their minds the entire night like ESPN was, and I was going back and forth between the two. It is wild to watch Sanders fall the way that he did, and then to talk to a Pittsburgh fan this morning, and they're like, I didn't want them to take him in the first round. This guy said to me, I'd be okay if the Steelers got him in the 3rd or 4th round, it would be fine. And I'm like, holy shit, we're talking about a guy that for a lot of the college football season was being talked about as maybe the number 1 pick in the draft or maybe the first quarterback off the board. So again, I'm watching this on Thursday night, and when the Steelers come up, I'm like, all right, this is probably a good time. They legitimately don't have a quarterback. And as I was mentioning before, Rodgers goes on McAfee's show and essentially says, yeah, I talked to the Steelers, but there's no deal in place. So you go, okay, well,
one of two things is going to happen here. The Steelers are either going to take Shedeur Sanders because they don't have a quarterback, or they're not going to take him, and then maybe that tells you they are going to sign Rodgers. But I don't even know if that's the case. It's an absolute mess. It's an absolute disaster. So then Pittsburgh goes up. They do not draft Shedeur Sanders. And then you go, holy shit. Where are we going from here? Because this is bad. This is bad, very bad. If you're a fan of Shedeur Sanders or the Shedeur Sanders brand or Deion Sanders, and you're looking at it from the perspective of a father who really believes his son was one of the best players in the draft, this had to feel horrible. And you're watching him fall and fall and fall. And when Pittsburgh didn't take him, all I kept thinking to myself was, this is going to get worse. I was like, he's going to fall out of the first round. Because once Pittsburgh didn't take him, I was like, this is it. It's it. It's done. It's over. There's no chance. There's no one else that's going to take him. And then you get New York. And New York makes a trade to get to number 25. They acquire the pick from Houston. And I go, I was like, wow. So the Giants might actually, they might take Shedeur Sanders. And in fairness, going into this draft, if you go back a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, there was the thought out there that if Shedeur Sanders had been available to the Giants at number 3, maybe they would have taken Sanders there. Again, this is weeks or months ago. And obviously when Abdul Carter's there, you take Abdul Carter. But when you see the Giants make this trade with Houston at 25, you go, oh, they're going to get their quarterback. For better or worse, they're going to get the guy that they're going to invest in long term. Deion Sanders, as the father, is going to be able to help his son, kind of navigate the New York media market. And you go, okay, this kind of makes sense. Except the Giants don't do it. The Giants draft Jackson Dart, who I have to be honest with you, what is Jackson Dart? Is he? I don't know. And if you look at a lot of the rankings that people had of where Jackson Dart was going to go, it certainly wasn't going to be number 25. So then you go, oh shit. When they pick Dart, I'm looking at the rest of the board and I'm like, there's nobody else. Detroit doesn't need a quarterback. Washington doesn't need a quarterback, nor does Buffalo, Philly, Kansas City. I made or Baltimore. I kind of made the joke over on Twitter. I was like, if Shedeur Sanders falls to 32, should the Eagles take him? 610, 632. Of course not. But I was like, oh my God, Sanders is really going to fall out of the first round. I can't believe it. And then he did. Now, I am not one of the people that enjoys the schadenfreude at the expense of the human being. I enjoy the story. And as I'm watching this guy fall, I'm like, you know what? Is this a message being sent by the NFL as a whole? Is this a message being sent to Deion Sanders? Is this a message being sent to the player? Because I'm going to go full circle here. There were those reports prior to the draft that he might not have been taking the process seriously. And again, there were some people who said it was racially based commenting and saying it anonymously is gutless and all that. And then there were some that was like, well, he's just not that good of a player. He's not truly a top 10 player, and he is going to fall. But I have to be honest, I was shocked, honestly, that he fell all the way out of the first round. And when I said at the top of the show that I thought it was more likely the Eagles were going to trade out of the first round, as this was developing, and after the Giants took Jackson Dart, I said to myself, this is where Howie's going to clean up. Because there will be a team in the second round who is going to get desperate and say, all right, Shedeur Sanders is still there at 32. We'll trade a 2026 first-round pick, maybe another pick this year, maybe another pick next year. Could you have theoretically gotten whatever the second-round pick is this year, next year's second-round pick, and next year's first-round pick out of whichever team it is, so that team could go up and get their quarterback in Shedeur Sanders? That's what I thought could happen, and it clearly did not. That is Listen. If it was a message being sent, I have to imagine that the message has been received loud and clear. And I'll tell you what, whoever gets Shedeur Sanders today, because it has to happen tonight. I have to imagine he's going in the second round, right? If not, if it falls to the third, holy shit. But whoever is going to get him is not going to get the potential bad attitude or entitled kid. They're going to get somebody who's got a big old chip on their shoulder. And I will tell you that I will happily root for Shedeur Sanders' success in this league, unless it comes against the Eagles. But like, this is like a slice of humble pie. So we'll see what happens. Let's see. I'm going to go back over to the comments here really quick because KW1323 thought that Shedeur crashing out was hilarious. Andrew Fawcett also thought it was funny. Says he falls out of the first. D.D. Skinner says thunk, which I guess is the sound that it made when he fell out of the first round. Landros 2 says Sanders fell. The hype machine didn't work. Yeah, I don't know. Andrew Fawcett asks, does his pop have anything to do with it? Here's the only thought that I had about whether or not Deion Sanders was also kind of being punished in this, okay? I know that one of the easy comparisons that people tried to make last year, and I guess this season too, was that like they were comparing Deion Sanders and Shedeur Sanders to LeVar Ball and Lonzo Ball. That you have this very outspoken parent who's hyping up their kid, believes their kid is one of the best, and wants to see their kid succeed. And I know that like there are people who get really in their feelings about the idea of a father, really pushing their kid towards greatness or pushing their kid. I think it's a good thing. I think as long as it's a healthy relationship, it's a good thing. I'd rather see a father be there for their kid, even if it means that the father's maybe going above and beyond, maybe overboard. I'd rather that than the alternative, right? And the alternative, well, I mean, I guess there are multiple versions of this, right? Like I, as a parent, will advocate for my kids, but we teach our kids, like, you need to advocate for yourself first. If there's an issue, you need to speak up for yourself first. And if that doesn't work, we're happy to support you and to help you. That goes like, whether it's the classroom, whether that's in sports, you need to speak up for yourself. And if that doesn't work, we're happy to help. You won't see me on the sideline of a game losing my ever-loving mind like a psycho. I don't like those parents that are like way overboard about like a kid's game. But when you're talking about a parent who is trying to hype up their kid as they're going into the pros, I'm okay with it if it's not a distraction and if it's not something that ultimately hurts their kids' chances of finding success. LeVar Ball promoted the big baller brand, and Lonzo got taken high in that draft, and yet his career didn't work out the way that he would have liked to or that LeVar would have wanted it to, but he got his kid on the map. In fact, he got 3 of his kids on the map. One's now rapping. One is still in the NBA, having a pretty good career. Lonzo, so I actually kind of felt bad for Lonzo that it didn't work out. Although I think he's still kind of floating around in the league. And then if you look at Shedeur Sanders, like this isn't the end for Shedeur Sanders. He doesn't like not get drafted in the first round and then fall off the face of the earth. Like he's still going to have a good career. Like Nick Saban talked about this last night during the draft, and he was on like the game day set. And he said, I honestly wish that we weren't talking about him falling. He's like, I think that we built up this idea of where he was supposed to go, and I don't think it was fair. And when you have Nick Saban saying that on the set, it's kind of like the kick in the ass, maybe even like a little punch to the testes that like, yo, we are creating way too big of a story out of this. And like, it is sort of schadenfreude. It is kind of like you start in the local news with the fire and the shooting and a hurricane and like a tsunami and like all this like death and sadness. And like, that's the way that you like lead the A block on the local news because it gets eyeballs. Now, like at some point you have to probably say, yo, we kind of need to stop focusing on this guy falling and maybe like start talking about the players who are being taken. And if we loop back around to this and the guy falls out of the round, well, then that's a conversation for post-draft. I gotta tell you, Cam Ward is like the guy that I feel the worst for because he goes number 1 in the draft to Tennessee. Not a single soul is talking about Cam Ward today. Not a single soul is talking about the fact that this kid got taken number 1 by Tennessee. Why? Most of it is because Shedeur Sanders fell. Another part of it is because Jacksonville executed an absolutely wild trade with Cleveland to go up and get Travis Hunter, who happened to play with Shedeur Sanders. But those were like the 2 big stories coming out of the draft. Travis Hunter trade by Jacksonville and Shedeur Sanders falling out of the first round. And now, in fairness, here I am talking about it the next day. But I'm reacting at the end of the draft, at the end of the first round, to talk about the macro perspective on his fall. Not in the moment, constantly going back and saying, wow, Shedeur Sanders, I think he's feeling pretty bad right now. I think think he feels like an idiot yet? You think his dad feels bad? So to answer Andrew's question, his dad might like I don't know. I don't know if teams or the league were trying to send a message to him and his dad. What I would say is that if you're a head coach of a football team and you're kind of on tenuous footing, you might not want to have taken Shedeur Sanders because you might fear for your own job security, right? Like there could be the idea that Shedeur Sanders ends up in your organization. If you're a coach who's kind of on their last legs potentially with the team, if it doesn't turn around, you're probably feeling like Deion Sanders might be gunning for your job. If you're a GM, do you want to deal with a very vocal Deion Sanders? Because that could put you on very tenuous footing. So I don't know. I guess it's like a very long way to answer that question.